Well, I would have you think about the best movie or the best novel that you've ever seen and ask yourself what sorts of characteristics do they have in common. And what most people come up with when I ask that question is they'll say, well, there are characters, really strong characters that get developed. There is a plot or some sort of conflict, and along with that, drama. The characters themselves do a lot of dialogue, both external dialogue, their words, and a lot of internal dialogue, what they think. And then finally, with really good novels, really good movies, there's almost always a moral or a universal lesson that people can take away from them. Yes, actually, we looked at the application of story in 12 different business functions. So, from customer service to a little bit on sales, marketing, branding, leadership development, strategy, difficult issues, organizational change, project management, and even in financial management. We're really the first folks to be looking at how does story apply in the financial field. So we found overall 72 examples between 2003 and 2006 that we actually showcase in the book Wake Me Up When the Data is Over. I'll share two of them. One is from the book, one is not. The reason I'm sharing these examples is because they have a lot of staying power over a number of years. The first one has to do with the Kentucky League of Cities. Back in 2001, Sylvia Lovely, who is the executive director, decided that it would be beneficial for her organization to start to incorporate stories into its work. So several things happened. One is the organization decided that every time they had a touch point with its members, that they would start listening for very critical stories that they could actually capture. They'd listen in their phone conversations, roundtable conversations, whether they have conferences or not. And those stories have been codified and actually put into an intranet database and coded by city and who gave the story. And then that database is actually searchable by keyword. So anytime they get a media inquiry, anytime someone needs to present, whatever the occasion might be, those stories are available to them. Now, what I think is really cool about what they've done is that they actually have a policy that all employees and interns get when they come to the organization about their role in collecting stories. And if I might, I'd like to read you a little bit of what that policy is. To ensure consistent and quality branding throughout all communication mediums, we shall use the storytelling format. Lessons and insights are always best absorbed and retained if there is an interesting story that demonstrates them, whether the message is sad, humorous, dramatic, angry, or simply entertaining. Any story that reflects human struggle and human triumph offers a far more compelling way to engage people at every level, from commitment to a cause to understanding of an issue at a deeper and more personal level. I think that they really are forerunners as an organization for institutionalizing story into the front end work that employees have with their members. Here's a story that's not in the book. Back in 2004, United Way found itself in a predicament. It wanted to move away from the traditional way of doing fundraising to a way in which they could improve people's lives by mobilizing the communities around them. So they had Charlotte Beers come, and she was presenting at their branding conference, and they said, Charlotte, what would you suggest? And she said, well, we're all storytellers. And they thought, wow, maybe we should go in search of a story. Well, wasn't it interesting that there was actually a story that existed within the community impact part of the organization, and the story itself is called The Ogre. So what happened was, in May of that year, the organization was planning to bring together leaders that represented its 1,400 affiliates across the country. Now, what's interesting is that there is no direct reporting relationship between those entities up to the corporate office. So what Dr. Janetta Cole did in her opening address is she actually shared with people her rendition of the Ogre story as a way to start to shift strategy around fundraising. And then they followed that up with a very short session on how to use story in your organization. Within 3 days following that event, Matt Gaston would tell you that that was one of the 3 most downloaded pieces of information in United Way's history. Now, to take it a step further, I started looking for ways in which this particular story was playing out in different places that I visited. I just happened to go to Indianapolis in August of that year to do a TV show, and I was reading the local newspaper, and on the top of the first section, or this first page of the second section of the paper, was this wonderful story about how the United Way agency in that particular community was changing its way of doing giving. I go to visit a colleague in Northern California a few weeks later. I'm on a walk with her, and she happens to say to me that she's on the board of the local United Way, and I say to her, hey, has anything changed? And she said, yeah, have you heard this story called The Ogre? Now, even as recent as September of this year, I was giving a presentation and sharing a bit about the ogre story. I had someone come up to me in the audience and say, I know that story because I'm involved with my local United Way in my state. And to take it even a step further, today I went onto the internet, Googled the ogre story United Way, and there are myriads of agencies across the country that have that, the shortened version of that story on the front page of their website. So I think that story has just had tremendous impact for the organization. You know, that's really an interesting statement. For each of the 72 examples that we feature in the book, we have a return on investment that's associated with it. And a number of those are anecdotal, because what business leaders will tell you is they didn't start out actually looking for results from their efforts, but they got results after the fact. And then there are those who actually put measurement systems in place to measure its impact. What was really striking to me, and I did a summary of this data for an article in Communication World magazine that followed the release of the book, is that 36% of the 72 examples actually show an impact to the financial bottom line of the organization. For some, to the tune of double-digit growth. Let me give you just one example. When I was talking to leaders at Kimpton Hotels, they said to me, and this was back in 2006, here are the results we've received. We have doubled in size. We are poised to double in size again. We have the lowest rate of employee turnover and the highest rate of customer return. Would that make a difference to anyone? Those are just beginning results. Then you've got results that show about 18% show increased employee engagement. Another 17-18% of the examples show that organizations were able to more quickly move toward achieving their goals. And then again, another 17-18% were telling us that they had improved levels of customer satisfaction. And I believe that all of those really are significant return on investment results. Well, what we learned in our research was really interesting to me. There are 5 different ways that stories can be used. We can try to find stories, as they do at the Kentucky League of Cities. We can start to dig into stories to say what's the real meaning behind them, and especially if you have like a lot of member feedback through the form of story, you can say, what are people really telling us? What are those golden nuggets that are themes that are hidden behind all of those stories? Then there are organizations who are selecting stories, being very strategic about what stories will actually be shared externally and also internally with its employees. You can also craft stories. And then finally, the 5th piece is what's really intriguing to me. We call it embodiment of story. Now, the telling of story, whether in the oral tradition or in print or electronically, is one piece of embodiment. But I really think that where we need to be looking in the future is at the symbolic use of story. And let me give you a very short example. If you were a Coca-Cola drinker, and I were to show you a picture of just the outline of a Coca-Cola bottle, and I were to say to you something like, tell me about a time in your life when this item factored into it significantly, you would have a host of stories about what that one symbol means to you. And I think that's where we really need to be going in the future, is to say what sorts of symbols can we create in our organizations that would actually become a trigger for people to tell their own stories inside their minds to reinforce who we are.